best thing about living in Hebden Bridge is...
fine pubs and the amazing people.
The worst thing...
the dire pubs and the terrible people.
The individuality of the town.
You know, every shop is different.
With all sorts of different genre of people living in the town.
But they kind of blend in.
And they're all accepted.
It gets a tad wet.
The weather's not brilliant.
The worst thing is the floods.
20 feet in water.
If you didn't have the rain, then the sun wouldn't be quite so nice.
It's a hit place to be.
It's fabulous.
Mark Steele's in town.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome to Mark Steele's in Town, which this week comes from the Hebden Bridge Trades Club in Hebden Bridge, a beautiful Yorkshire mill town, impeccably loyal to the old Victorian working-class traditions of pagan chanting and rampant lesbianism. When I came here, I went to the tourist information office, and a woman there honestly told me, she said, one day a woman come marching up to the counter. I said, can I help you? And she said, I hope so. I've heard this is a lesbian town and I want you to find me one. But you can tell the people who aren't used to it here and are just on a day trip and they're not used to the sort of Hebden Bridge way of things, because they'll be the ones who go, oh my God, look, there's a man juggling on the roof of the town hall wearing nothing but a silver thong and a Stetson. And Hebden Bridge people go, yeah, that's Ralph, he's up there every Tuesday. This is the heckles here, they're fantastic. Someone told me they were watching a comic here one night and someone shouted out, could you please provide some context for your anecdote? There was a suggestion at one point that security cameras should be set up to prevent crime. But according to one local book, A View from the Bridge, security cameras would create as many problems as they solved, as the town is so full of bearded men with straggly hair they could all get by on the same passport photo. One result of this unusual mix is the little cards that advertising local traders on the wall in the chip shop. And they're a work of art, because there'll be one saying, need a roof mended? Call Terry's Tiles, next to chant your way to cosmic karma. Here's a list of the ones in there at the moment. Down to Earth Psychic Centre drop-in, Stop the Wailing, Atherton Plumbing. This one, Clowning Around Workshop. Discover your inner clown for £50. This one, Harp Alignment. Harp music as a powerful and ancient method of healing. Now, you've got to be careful with that, because I knew a bloke who took an overdose, had to have his ears pumped. But Hebden Bridge also attracts people because it's a glorious valley and every direction from here is up. I'm sure this is how Hebden Bridge first became populated, when people wandered down from the hills and thought, sod going back up, we'll live here. So it made perfect sense for the Tour de France to come through here in 2014. Whose idea was it to invite a sport that's desperately trying to shed its image of being tainted with drugs to spend a day in Hebden Bridge? Some people here approach the Tour de France in a typically joyous Yorkshire spirit. This is Kez from the local Heb Web website. I'm planning a JCB rally on Sunday the 6th of July. There will be an assortment of JCBs parked nose to tail all the way up the Keighley Road from the White Lion to Peckett Well. Just as the Tour de France organised didn't see fit to inform me about their disruption and road closures, I don't see why I should let them know about my JCB rally on the same day. That's the spirit. Because it can seem unusual here to the outsider. The sign on the road as you're leaving Hebden Bridge, instead of saying, thank you for driving carefully, says, I'm sure you all know, so Hebden Bridge. Which is, the sign is so Hebden Bridge. That's the sort of thing that makes me love it here. Are all your signs like that? If there's a crash, do you have a yellow sign going, OMG, fatal accident, awkward? And there can't be many places where a teacher does this. According to the book A Sense of Belonging I've got there, this is an exact quote. I gave each child in my class a leaflet about checking for nits. And the next day, one of them brought in a letter from his parents saying, "Nits have every right to live." Hebden Bridge, we all know you went through an even more harrowing disaster recently than the nit crisis because at Christmas 2015, the whole town was almost washed away. You must have been grateful, I would imagine, that you had plenty of practical people here with the skills needed for an emergency like that, such as cat reiki. All through Christmas, wasn't it? And it must have seemed biblical, absolutely biblical. To make things even more religious, as part of the clearing up, it seems you were visited by the Ahmadiyya Muslims and Khalsa Aid Sikhs who set up kitchens to feed the town while you were underwater. Now, see, if you were a normal town and the shops were full of pot noodles, the water would have just puffed them up and you'd have been fine. It said the Muslims and the Sikhs came in and prepared all these meals, and the effect wasn't just to feed people, because one lad was quoted in the newspaper as saying, "I used to hate Asians, but I'm ashamed of that now I see how they're helping us." Which just goes to show, I think, if only Muslims and Sikhs everywhere could be bothered to go round everybody's house and clean up and make everyone dinner, maybe people wouldn't be racist. Even when it's dry in Hebden Bridge, it's unorthodox here, because as soon as you arrive at the magnificent Hebden Bridge station, with its floral displays and antiques and that idyllic 1950s bar that makes you want to grab a stranger and say, "Must you leave, dearest?" You see, I've had the most splendid day getting our hearts aligned, and that skunk we smoked by the river was simply delicious. But no one should be fooled by Hebden Bridge, because you're not as shambolic as you sometimes like to look. You can tell this from the impressive level of organisation that it takes to organise a town centre in which there are 200 shops, 198 of which are cafes. And there's a cafe for every type of person. There's a dog cafe full of dogs that makes cakes especially for dogs. I'd like to speak to Jonathan. And you all know the dog cafe, presumably? So you sell dog cakes, and what other products have you got there?
You know, you get numb to it when you do it every day, and then put it in this context. It's, beer.
Dog beer?
Dog beer, not for humans. That'd be ridiculous.
What's in the dog beer? Is it like puddles? And what about other animals? Are other animals?
We've had a cat in a bag, a skunk in a bag, and a rabbit in a bag.
A skunk? As in anywhere else, that would be the front page headline. But here, there was skunking bug. Oh, the smell put the dogs off their beer. But it fits in here because this town is a mix of modern flakiness and tradition, and because it's an old mill town, it's got a rivalry with all the other nearby mill towns, especially the pitiful den of sordid squalor that goes under the name of Todmorden. I'll give an example of the rivalry. The Todmorden News was due to be merged with the Hebden Bridge Times. And you weren't happy with this then? There's been uproar from the HebWeb website with comments such as this one. Something could be headline news in Todmorden, but it would only merit a small item for people in Hebden. So what do people think of Todmorden? Is it... Well, that's what I thought that. I thought it's got much in common because there's even a lesbian community in Todmorden started up that makes it a sort of lesbian overspill town. Recently there's been a campaign here which has even been discussed on Radio 4 to have Hebden Bridge, did you know about this, installed officially as Britain's second town. Now, I hope this doesn't sound insulting. I think that's quite ambitious. So I'm going to speak to David here. And you're from the Innovations Mill.
That's true, yep.
What is the claim? Have I got that right?
No, you got it wrong. It's not Britain's second town, it's Britain's second city.
Of course. Let's put in Hebden Bridge down.
Let's get it right. There's a place that we hear about, but only visit when we have to, with about 12 million people in Greater London and South East region, and it dominates. And we want to have our own place up here. So we've got Britain's second city with a population of between 7 million and 12 million, depending where you draw the borders. And in the centre of it is Hebden Bridge. And because it's Hebden Bridge, it's everything you'd expect. It's an upside-down town. It's a city with a glorious green belt in the middle, and suburbs with quaint names like Manchester, Liverpool, Sheffield, Bradford.
I think you're underselling yourself because you're only 300 miles from Paris, so surely you're France's second city as well.
Well, come on, give us a break, you know, a step at a time. I mean, where else? I travel all over the world and I really enjoy it. It's a passion of mine is travelling, but there's only one place that's worth living in, and it's here.
OK. Thanks very much, David. And I'll come back to you in a little minute, but I've got to say this. David is the most brilliant person to meet when you first come to Hebden Bridge, because there's no way of stopping him talking. I met him and he started by going, thing with this town is we're getting depleted, I wanted to refurbish the area. So in 60s, property were cheap and we used to beauty a valley to attract artistic types. The marvellous thing is we're halfway online between Leeds and Manchester, whereas Todmorden thought it's in Yorkshire, though its cricket team plays in Lancashire League. And then I thought, when this was discussed on Radio 4, did it end with a whistle blowing and Nicholas Parsons saying, so David is this week's winner? He's been talking without hesitation for 9 years. David's story is impressive because the amazing thing about this place with its dog cafes and massages and ramblers is this was a town of the Industrial Revolution. As it's a valley, then the water comes down the hills at a fair speed, making it a perfect place to set up mills. Now, the negative side of being in a valley is, of course, that you get flooded regularly, although it could be argued you're not helping the situation by making God angry with all the lesbians. But that's it. The cloth here was ideal for making corduroy, so that became the Hebden Bridge speciality. According to that book, A Sense of Belonging, people took kids to school past the gasworks if they had a cold, as they thought the fumes killed germs. And if the gasworks was still here, there'd be a card in the chip shop saying £50 gas therapy. And scrawled across it would be, germs have every right to live. So most people here, back in Victorian times, either worked in the mills or as farm labourers, but many of the mills were run as cooperatives. Now, the co-op movement started up the road in Rochdale, and by the 1870s, the weavers actually ran some of the mills, and a Hebden Bridge weaver called Robert Halstead set one up here, where the profits were shared out amongst the workforce. And the weavers were encouraged to learn languages during their breaks, and university lecturers came to Hebden Bridge to give talks on subjects such as the French Revolution and Shakespeare. And I'm not an expert on Shakespeare, but I reckon Shakespeare's meant to be done in Yorkshire. It's meant to be. Here, we're out laking it woods like, I thought, that's ghost, is that? I says, that fella murdered me. I said, he never did. He said, aye. He said, no, wants to get revenge, does thee? I said, happen. So I did like, well, next thing, our town's been stabbed with our deed on floor. It had that to do with that. The local co-op movement here campaigned in support of Abraham Lincoln and against slavery at the time of the American Civil War. And there were meetings at Todmorden as well in favour of Abraham Lincoln. But even if Abraham Lincoln had turned up himself, it may have been headline news in Todmorden. A small item in Hebden Bridge. But however eccentric Hebden Bridge may seem now, in some ways it was even more peculiar in the past. For example, there's a book set here. It's possibly the most magnificent title of any book ever. It's called Memoirs of a Japanese Chicken Sexer in 1935 Hebden Bridge. Does some of you know this book? Is it on the school curriculum? The chicken sexer in question was Koichi Ando, and he trained at a special chicken sexing school in a place called Nagoya and then came to Hebden Bridge. He learnt to tell the sex of baby chickens and then applied for a job at a farm here. And it's quite difficult to read his memoirs without doing them in a terrible voice because they say things like, in morning, I sexed chicken about 1,400. I went to barber's, he trim in disorderly fashion, therefore I felt itchy very much. He must have come as a challenge, I would guess, because on top of everything else, Hebden Bridge chickens wouldn't want to be labelled by gender in the first place. But how did this town go from being a Yorkshire farming and trouser-making centre to become the psychic, harper-lining, New Age multi-cafe valley it is today? It seems that in the 1950s, the mills mostly shut down, half the population left. You could buy a house for 50 quid or move in and squat. So artists and hippies moved in, and David Fletcher told me, amongst other things, the first to come were Reg and Marion. But Reg was arrested for possession of dope, so the vicar paid his fine, and the vicar turned out to be Anna Ford, the newsreader's brother. It's true, isn't it, David? Many of the houses at the time were condemned as slums, and they were unusual because they were known as top and bottom houses. The two houses were built on top of each other on the steep hills, with a front door into the top one, and then lower down the hill, another front door into the bottom house. And sets of these houses were opposite each other. So one writer here said, "You learn not to walk round naked if your house is overlooked." Really? In Hebden Bridge? It's more likely people think, oh, it was so embarrassing. I was walking around the kitchen in full view of the neighbours and I wasn't naked. Who knows what the kids Ocelot and Polar Bear thought. So this was the way the town was renewed, by encouraging hippies to move in. And David also told me that if the town hoped to bring in a lot of new people, it would have to look a lot more attractive than it was. So this must be the only time anywhere when people said, oh, we'd better tidy up and make the place look nice. We've got hippies coming. So I've got to come back to David again here. So did the old residents object, or did they welcome the hippies?
They welcomed them, and the hippies were really glad to be here. A lot of them came here from Robin Hood's Bay. In Robin Hood's Bay, every Saturday night, there was a drunken crowd outside the cottage where they were living, chucking stones at their door. Then they came here, and, you know, Reg and Marion were good at the guitar and singing, and they went round the local pubs, and everybody was delighted. It was a bit of a revelation. And then there were the Foster Clough hippies. They came out here thinking they could do self-sufficiency. At 1,000 feet in the Pennines, you must be joking. But after a little while, when they were all starving, they started making bits of jewellery and doing bits of woodworking, chess sets made out of broom handles, you know, the sort of thing.
I do, yeah. I wish I'd known a bit more about David before I come. I would have only needed to write 4 lines. But it wasn't just hippies, it was artists came as well. I mean, artists pop up in places you wouldn't always expect. I went to John the Barber's, which looks like a proper old-fashioned barber's, run by John, who moved up here from East London. And it turns out to be the only barber's that's also got an art gallery. Then all round the walls there are these brilliant portraits and paintings he's done. And it's even better because he's proper East London, John. I swear this is what he said when I went in there. He went, I'll tell you what I love about here, Mark. You see that hill up there? You go up there, you know what you can see? Bugger all. Perfect for painting, that is. How many people have had their hair done by him? Well, I want to know, when he's finished, instead of a mirror, does he show you an oil painting of the back of your head? But the old Yorkshire customs here haven't died away. For example, there's still a competition every year for who can make the best dock pudding. Now, this is considered a delicacy here, although the recipe is to scrunch up dock leaves and stinging nettles and fry them with oatmeal and onion. And I have to tell you, I don't see that as a recipe. That's more a desperate attempt to stay alive when you've been stranded in a forest as the only survivor of a plane crash. There's a World Championship dock pudding contest. Has anyone here ever entered? No. Sorry, what's your name? Elizabeth. So you entered the World Dock Pudding Championship?
I did.
And did you have a special recipe, or did you...
I'm not telling, like everybody else, we don't share them.
Oh!
Somebody a few years ago tried to mess about with it and add garlic and was completely disqualified. The judges were not impressed.
What's this? Garlic and it's stinging nettles? That time to give it flavour.
It's beautiful.
This is what I learned about a dock pudding, you're supposed to fry these lumps of dock leaves and nettles with bacon. And there was uproar one year when the World Championship was won by a woman who made a vegetarian dock pudding. Now, I can see why people were puzzled, because most people would give the prize to someone who just fried the bacon and left out everything else. Just as perfect for Hebden Bridge is the history of the football team, the Red Stars. There is a book, The History of the Red Stars. This is a true story of Hebden Bridge's team. In 1950s, Nick Helliwell, for a match away at Copley, brought his mother's nightie by mistake with pink edgings, but played in the nightie as the game had to go on. Of course, because it was inevitable that the world's first cross-dressing football player played for Hebden Bridge. Another side to the romance of the area is the poet Ted Hughes came from, please Lord get this right, Mythenroyd. And many of his hilarious and joyful poems were set in the valley. The one about the hawk that sees its prey and rips it to shreds without a second thought is a favourite at Christmas. And his trilogy about misery is ideal for kids' parties. Now, according to his memoirs, yesterday I went into Hebden Bridge and signed up to discover me inner clown. Best 50 quid I ever spent. But to be fair, eventually Ted decided to cheer himself up by marrying Sylvia Plath. Now, after they were married, they only came back to Hebden Bridge occasionally, and they wrote their famous poem that I'm sure you all know, set in Hebden Bridge. Or River Corder, bringing order to life's rough game at chance. We went down today, but in the way was the bastard Tour de France. But the most controversial mark he left was Sylvia's gravestone, because she killed herself after she'd left Ted, who wasn't always the gentleman. But Ted had her body brought back to Heptonstall, and then he ordered her gravestone to read Sylvia Plath Hughes. So feminist campaigners regularly went to the gravestone and chiselled off the Hughes. It's on at the moment, I noticed. I mean, so the stonemasons had to keep a regular supply of chiselled out Hugheses as a quick stick-on replacement. Now, this is a perfect example of how old and new Hebden Bridge traditions complement each other. The skilled stonemason chisels Hughes in, then the feminist smashes it off again, making a point and creating work to preserve the old crafts all at once. I went up to the graveyard. It was a slightly peculiar experience. Have you all been there? Yeah. I was shown to Sylvia's grave by a man of about 70, because I don't think you'd find it otherwise. It's not easy to find. And as I went into the graveyard, he went, "Are you looking for Sylvia Plath? She's not easy to find. This church here were burnt down by lightning. Imagine how scary that must have been." I love her poems. They're very dark, they're very scary. I wrote one myself. I left it engraved. 24 hours later, it were gone. Now, you explain that. And marvellously, one person who seemed to embody this outlook of a growing, inclusive spirit full of joie de vivre was the press secretary for Margaret Thatcher, a man called Bernard Ingham, who comes from Hebden Bridge. And when he was asked what he thought about his hometown, he said, "Hebden Bridge is tantamount to Sodom and Gomorrah." To be fair, it's nice to see a politician giving a straight answer to it. He used to write a column for the Hebden Bridge Times, and at one point he made this measured remark saying, "That Hebden Bridge has become known as a lesbian capital does not say very much for the men of the town." In his favour, there is a charming simplicity to seeing the world like this, as if the women of Hebden Bridge have looked at all the blokes and gone, "Bloody hell, they're all dreadful. There's nothing for it. We'll have to start on each other." There was a brilliant saying called "getting the bus to Hebden Bridge." Do people know about this? which meant coming out as a lesbian. Now, the first question I have to ask here, what if you really were getting the bus to Hebden? And you told someone that's what you were doing? There must have been people all over Yorkshire going, well, I never would have thought that about Elsie. But now Hebden Bridge is changing again. The book A Sense of Belonging says, watch the trains that get in at Mytham Royd Station around 9 in the morning and you'll see a flood of lawyers arriving. There are now, did you know this? There are now more people with degrees per population in Hebden Bridge than in any other town. And so much intelligence in Hebden Bridge, and yet somehow you can't work out you can't cure diarrhoea with a harp. So it seems Hebden Bridge has gone on a marvellous route of history in which the mills declined, so half the town left, so the houses were condemned and cheap, so artists and hippies moved in, so the place became chic, so then the property prices soared, so now the artists and hippies that came here and made it chic can't afford to live here and the place is full of solicitors. But the free spirit is definitely still here. There are no mainstream shops because who wants items that someone might own in Halifax? Sainsbury's wanted to buy land here and there's a campaign against them because you could fit another 9 cafes on that bit of ground. One of the charms of Hebden Bridge is it was built as a dirty industrial mill town, and now the canals and mills are seen as things of beauty that people love to live by and wander around. It's like if in 200 years' time a retail park on the edge of Burnley becomes the most desirable area. With people going, oh, it's just delightful. I mean, our flat was converted from a Nando's. We just love rambling around the old Sports Direct, and they've still kept the original bins at the back of Iceland. Because in a way, this town hasn't changed that much. From the setting up of the co-ops, it's kept out the corporate shops and you still call eating leaves a treat. You'd expect the football team to express themselves as a piece of performance art. You've campaigned for people's rights from slaves to people who can't be bothered to get dressed. It's fitting, therefore, I think, that I leave you with the words of your most celebrated local poet, Ted Hughes, in his poem dedicated to the people of this area that he loved so much. And thank you very much, Hebden Bridge. I'll leave you with this. They swoop for prey at the co-op for Sawyer. And if they've not got it, they'll sue their lawyer. There's respect for wild nature as if times were feudal, with cafes that serve cups of tea for a poodle. When the town floods, folk don't sit around whining, they go to town nude for some harp realigning. And for carnal delights to please lesbian purists, ask where they're found at the office for tourists.
Mark Steele's In Town was written and performed by Mark Steele, with additional material by Pete Sinclair. It was produced in Hebden Bridge by Carl Cooper, and it was a BBC Studios production.